Everyone, Heather Tanana and I'm really happy to be here and to introduce our next speaker, who's going to give a summary of the ongoing players and efforts. We will not have Q&A during this initial introductory remarks, but thrilled to have Steve Clyde, Vice President, Director and Shareholder, Chairman of the Board of Directors, Co-Chair of Natural Resources and Water Law Practice Group at ClydeSnow, such a staple in our water legal community, and someone that I learned water law from a few years back. So thank you. Let's give a warm introduction to Steve.
Thank you, Heather. Yes, she was one of my stellar students. You've heard the phrase, it takes a village. It clearly is going to take the entire state, the entire community to get Great Salt Lake back to where it was. We lose about 1 million acre feet a year to evaporative loss off the lake. So to get any net gain, we have to top that. And so while these donations we're seeing, like the LDS Church donation of 20,000 acre feet is wonderful, it will be perpetual. It's a drop in the overall bucket. And so we've got to do an awful lot more. But what's encouraging to me is how broad the support is and how many people are in fact actively involved in this. Starting with the governor, he passed a proclamation this year withdrawing from further appropriation any water in the Bear River drainage, the Weber drainage, and the Jordan River drainage. While there isn't a lot of unappropriated water left except in the Bear River system, that at least puts a pause on, says we're not going to appropriate any more water. We'll do what we can now to work with what we have and move forward. The legislature over the past 2 general sessions passed 40 bills dealing with water, modernizing Utah's water laws, continuing a trend we've been doing for the last 15 years of kind of taking small incremental steps to modernize the appropriation doctrine, which was a very good thing in the 18th, 19th century as it was being developed in the West. Doesn't serve our century very well. And so we've tried to deal with those issues as well. Legislature has put a tremendous amount of money behind water conservation. The ag optimization program, I think, is going to bear great results. We need to see how that unfolds. We've also had tremendous media cooperation. And the Great Salt Lake Collaborative, which is a consortium of our local media outlets, including Amplify Utah, Axios Salt Lake, Deseret News, Fox News, KSL News and Radio, KUR, Public NPR, the Salt Lake Tribune, the Standard Examiner, and others, are all making sure we get a very consistent and very thorough message. And there have been at least 3 articles just this week on Great Salt Lake issues in the papers. In terms of NGOs, we've had the Great Salt Lake Advisory Board that has been around for a long time, that has conducted multiple studies and good research on trying to outline issues and solutions to some of the problems on the lake. We have the Nature Conservancy and the Audubon Society that are heading up the Water Trust, using the $40 million allocation or appropriation to try and go out and acquire water rights by lease or by purchase and move that water to the lake. We have the Great Salt Lake Strike Force, comprised of the Utah State University, University of Utah, DNR, UDAF, and DEQ, as well as many in the scientific community that have been involved in this, offering their help. And we heard a lot of that yesterday from these very, very qualified experts. We also have a lot of our political subdivisions involved, from Central Utah Water Conservancy District, Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, Weber Basin Water Conservancy, Provo River water users, the Salt Lake Metro District, as well as almost all of our municipalities that are busy dealing with landscape ordinance changes, turf removal projects, and a lot of things to try and help reduce urban consumption. Ag takes a bad hit because they are big water users, but the urban people can and are trying to do things as well, and that needs to be recognized. One thing that's interesting, though, is that our current population in the 11 counties that form the Great Salt Lake Drainage Basin currently has a population of 2,009,000 people, 900,000 people. But we're projected to grow to 4,600,000 people by 2060. All of those people need water to drink, water for sanitation. We have to grow food. We need water for jobs, for industry. And we don't have any more water in Utah. It is a relatively finite supply. So where do we turn for that? It has to come from conservation, both in the ag world, but in the other world as well. And I think if we see the ongoing efforts that we've seen this last couple of years at the political level, it will bring the citizens along with it. We saw tremendous conservation savings in our urban areas last year during the extreme drought, and I think we'll see a lot more. Again, within the 11 counties of the Great Salt Lake Basin, there are 2,300,000 acres of farmland, of which 417,000 are irrigated, according to the Department of Agriculture and Food. Together, those irrigated farms, deplete about 1.3 million acre feet from the system. And so there's a lot of water there being used. But as we heard yesterday, it is also providing food. It is providing feed for natural resources for the birds that migrate. And ag is not a bad guy. And that's something that needs to be taken in mind everywhere. The other thing that's recognized is that within the farms in the Great Salt Lake Drainage Basin, they generate about $700 million throughout the year. And that's a lot of revenue coming from farming. Yes, it's a blip in terms of the overall gross domestic product of the state of Utah, but it's still an important cultural part of our state. And it would be very difficult, I think, to say you no longer matter because you're only about 2% of our economics, and so we ought to have you go away. That just isn't going to happen in Utah, and it's not even a reasonable suggestion. The Ag Optimization Program is hoped to save about 10 to 15% of water annually, or about 180,000 acre feet of water that can be conserved, used for other purposes. We also have the mineral extraction industry that's, we heard yesterday, is now $1.5 billion in terms of its economic impact to the state. And recreation, particularly the ski industry, generates 5.8 million visitors. They contributed $2.35 billion in terms of income to the state last year. Those are pretty significant numbers, and the ski industry is largely dependent on lake effect snow coming off Great Salt Lake. It's very important that we continue to maintain and protect that resource from the environmental standpoint, from our health standpoint, and our water supply standpoint. I'm encouraged that we're going to get there. How quickly? I don't know. Criticism yesterday was that, well, we're not doing it fast enough. Well, it's taken us decades to get here. This is something that will take decades to cure. But if we don't start now and start making some very, very strong efforts, we're not going to get there at all. And the end result of that won't be very pleasant for anybody. So I think I'm going to quit at that because I know we're short on time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. As we shift into solution discussions for the remainder of the afternoon, I thought it was really helpful to have that overview of who are the players, what's happening in our state right now related to the Great Salt Lake. And so our next session, just get these slides going up, goes a little more into a topic that we heard Representative Wilson mention earlier. Banking, from ridge to shoreline, water conservation and water banking in the Great Salt Lake. Thrilled to introduce two amazing women who are really working on the ground, thinking creatively to implement solutions. We have Emily Lewis. I'll invite you to come up as I mention your name and take a seat here. Emily Lewis is the director and shareholder, co-chair of Natural Resources and Water Law Practice Group, also with ClydeSnow and Sessions. And then we also have Candice Hasenyager. She is the director of our Utah Division of Water Resources. And we're going to start with Candice. Thank you. And this, as a reminder, we'll have Q&A after. So feel free to open up your phone, slido.com, #Stegner, put in your questions as we're going through, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Thanks.
Good morning. How are you guys? Right? Good. So I was taking my daughter to school this morning, and she looks at me and she says, "Mom, are you wearing green?" And I kind of like sheepishly looked down and like, "No." And I quickly got a pinch. And I thought, dang it, because I love wearing green. I mean, I'm going to have to borrow Randy's hat. That's a great hat, Randy. But I have to say, if that's the least of my problems today, then I think I'm doing okay. So let's kind of start off celebrating the good news, I guess. We have a banner snowpack here, which is amazing. Like Speaker Wilson mentioned, that we are out of the blue. We are setting new records as our high. So this is a figure that many of you are probably very familiar with. You have on the x-axis the water year, and on the y-axis snow water equivalent. So we took a bucket of snow, melted it down, and measured how much water's in the snow. That's what that represents. So it's pretty exciting. We've also heard today that this is not going to solve our problems in the long term. It takes a little bit of the pressure off, a little bit of the crisis, and it gives us a little bit of time as we implement all of the many things that we're working on, and including about the $1 billion that the state legislature has invested in water conservation and water infrastructure over the next, as we're implementing all of that money in these programs. So when I think about water conservation, I think about how do we use water? And so this is something I love to do. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about how you used water this morning. And then I just want you to shout it out, and then I'll speak it back into the microphone for those. So ready, set, go. Shower, brush your teeth. Ate breakfast. I love someone tied in water to eating. That's important. What else? Drinking some water. Did anyone turn on a light this morning? Right? So energy is connected to our water. Farming is connected to the food we eat, and they use water. From the clothes we wear to the furniture we're sitting on, it all uses water, and it all contributes to our life. So when I think about water, and I'm a geeky engineer, sorry, I think about the water budget of the state. And due to some amazing people who worked at the Division of Water Resources for decades in time, we have a water budget of the state with 156 sub-areas that looks at all the inflows, the outflows, diversions, depletions for the state. So when we zoom into Great Salt Lake, we can see that, and this, once again, geeky engineer, this is the, over time, how the inflows into the Great Salt Lake have changed, and what's the difference. So these have the annual values on the x-axis, and then the volume on the y-axis. So you can see the biggest contributor to Great Salt Lake is the Bear River, followed by the Jordan River, Weber River, and then some that comes off of the West Desert. And when we look about how we use water and look at how the depletions are for the Great Salt Lake Basin entirely. The black line represents the total depletion in this basin. The blue line represents agricultural depletions, and then followed by municipality, Great Salt Lake mineral extraction, wetlands, managed wetlands, reservoir evaporation, and all those type of things. So those are all that we have to consider when we're talking about how we use water. I'm going to focus for my talk on the first two, in agricultural water use as well as municipal water use. And as we've spent time over this last number of years, we have prioritized these kind of 4 big pots where we use the most, or where we can get the biggest bang for our buck, for most water reduction for the dollars invested. And investment has been put into these programs thanks to the legislature. Let's start talking about integrating land use and water planning. And so this is really that kind of idea of how we grow matters, and how we grow today will set our water use patterns for decades to come. So that's really about adopting water efficiency standards for new construction, implementing water into the general plan for municipalities. So there's a lot of exciting work going on there. There's been about a $250,000 investment in that so far, and hopefully looking to get more. We're also implementing landscaping rebates. $10 million one time and $3 million ongoing has been invested into that program, and we're excited to get that up and running next month. It has been established in a lot of the water conservancy districts. We're looking at spreading it farther across the state. And then secondary metering, this is a huge one, are required for all pressurized secondary systems. $250 million was invested into this, and it's pretty exciting. And then agricultural water optimization is another one where $276 million, if you count all the money that's been invested into it over the last few years, have been sent into this program, and exciting to see that take off. So just real quick, I want to talk a little bit about agricultural water use and then the opportunities associated with that agricultural optimization. So when we look at that water budget for the state and we look over the last 30 years, we find that agricultural water use has roughly diverted 80%. And that diversion number is an important number because that is not what is consumed. There's a lot of return flows and system water that makes it back into the system. And then about 20% has gone to diverted to municipal and industrial water uses. And if we look at the last kind of 5 years, we're seeing that number decline for agriculture. Now they're only using about 75% of the diverted water and 25% going to municipal and industrial water use. We have had at Water Resources a pretty long-standing program called the Water-Related Land Use Program. We've been doing it for decades, where we go out and we collect information on what is being grown in Utah, how is it being irrigated, so we can see whether it's, has the crops been fallowed? Are they field crops? Are they grains or seeds? Are they hay? Are they pasture? Is it alfalfa? So we can tell how much is being grown, and then we also know how it's being irrigated. Is it flood irrigated? Is it drip? Is it sprinkled? And then we know that there's a bunch of research that has gone on to tell us, how efficient are those different irrigation practices. There are advantages and disadvantages to each. And so how can we apply some additional efficiency within our farms and producers to, save additional water? And then, as I mentioned, $276 million has been appropriated to the agricultural optimization program, and really with the goal to reduce consumptive water use while maintaining agricultural production and profitability and increase operational flexibility moving forward. So that's a great program run through UDAF and that we support fully going forward. Municipal water use, and a lot of people are like, municipal water use, we barely use any of that pie, right? Like about a quarter. Why are you focusing on me? Why not just focus on ag? It's a great question, and one that I'd say there's a lot of reasons why we as people should use less water in our homes and in our gardens. For example, reduce need now means that we have to develop less water in the future for our kids and our grandkids and our friends who are moving in from out of state. It also causes us to reduce in treatment costs, to treat the water and to get it to homes, reduced energy costs to pump that water out of our groundwater. It creates more drought resiliency, and there's more water left in the system for the natural environment. So there's lots of reasons why we should use less water in our homes and our gardens. When we think about municipal and industrial water use, there's kind of 4 big pots. Really, it's residential, institutional, so residential, your home, your garden. Institutional, think the church down the street, the state office building, the university that you may be sitting in, a commercial building, maybe the grocery store, the gas station, and then industrial. So those are our manufacturers who are building and creating things. And so you can see here, this is from 2021 with the statewide average. And so we have a very comprehensive water use information. Not any other state in the nation has the water use information that we do. And so really 224 may sound like a large number, but it includes everything. And we do have opportunity to conserve more. In 2019, we developed the statewide regional water conservation goals. So by 2030, it's about trying to get us down to 200. And so I put this out there because we find that how we use water really depends on a lot of factors. How hot is it? How much rain did we get? How did people use water? And if you look at this since 2015, we have seen a decrease, which is awesome. You will notice when you send a whole population home in 2020 that we have I'm going to call it the COVID anomaly, where there's a spike in water use is what we're seeing. But we are seeing a reduction, and that's great. And then want to talk about kind of when we think about long-term water conservation, there's really 3 things that we can do. One is we can regulate. We can tell people what to do, whether that's through water conservation plans, whether it's through metering requirements, tiered water rates, requiring landscaping ordinances, improving plumbing standards, which are all in the works. We also have incentives that we can offer people. So really it's kind of like the stick and the carrot approach. We can force them to do it, and then we can also incentivize them to do it. So using smart controller rebates, landscaping rebates, toilet rebates, all the ways we use water in our homes and our gardens and in our commercial buildings, to use less of it. And then there's education with slow the flow, smart billing, and education to our youth, which is really important, and as well as our city leaders and how they can better implement water conservation practices. So I just want to go through a couple of highlights. Some of these have already been covered, so I may not spend a lot of time on each of them. One of is the water conservation plans. So the Water Conservation Act requires all water districts and public water systems over 500 connections to submit a water conservation plan every 5 years. It used to be that they had to state a water conservation goal. Last year, there was a requirement that requires the water suppliers to meet the regional water conservation goals, which is excellent. It gives us all a place that we are aiming for. And it also, previously, only about a quarter of them even referenced it. So it's a good thing that way. As I mentioned, secondary meters, $250 million last year, and then another $18 million this year. So far, the Board of Water Resources has already authorized over $190 million to install it, which will get about 115,000 meters into the ground, which we expect a 20 to 30% savings, which is roughly the size of East Canyon Creek, which is 54,000 acre feet. So pretty exciting there. Last year, there was also a requirement for state entities and state agencies to meet a 25% goal. So the state is trying to take a leadership role in that and lead by example. We also have requirements for cities and municipalities to adopt water preservation element in their general plan. And they have to do this by 2025. And we're really here to help with that. We've hired a staff person to help reach out to cities and to coordinate that. As far as incentives go, we need to do all of the things, like I mentioned, with landscaping rebates, and we already have rebates going towards smart controllers, toilets, and grants towards secondary metering. So we kind of looked at how far $1 million will stretch us, and we're doing all the right things in that field and have, thanks to the legislature, a lot of money to get out to the folks. And as far as education, there's just a couple I wanted to touch on here. So Growing Water Smart Workshop, this is a really awesome program in which we're bringing the land use planners and the water planners together. And so these are your municipality leaders and those in the public water suppliers who run the water systems, bring them together, developing a shared vision on what they want for their city, and then helping them create a plan to put that into action. We've had 1 workshop so far and 2 more planned for this year, so really exciting to continue to bring communities together in that way. Speaker Wilson already covered Utah waterways, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but excited to work with the Department of Natural Resources and all of the board members and the private entities as we implement that education program. And then lastly, I wanted to cover the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. And really, when I think about the Great Salt Lake Basin, this is an interconnected and complex system. There's over 36,000 square miles, 4 states, 18 counties, 140 cities, 70 groundwater aquifers, 1,300 reservoirs, over 2.9 million people, 1.5 million acres of farmland, 600 and almost 700,000 urban acres, 184,000 acres of wetland. And we really can't afford to pit one lake against another or one water user against another. We really need to come together and work together. And so that's one of the goals of this, is really to implement an integrated surface and groundwater model, as well as capture all the things that are going on in the Great Salt Lake Basin and make sense of them. So we are working on that diligently. We'll have a work plan completed by November of this year, and then we will keep working on it throughout, work on the work plan. So it'll be good. Then a couple of websites of note. We have the greatsaltlake.utah.gov, which was a collaborative effort by DNR and DQ. Go here, it has all the things related to Great Salt Lake in one location. And then we also have a drought.utah.gov that kind of does the same thing, but for drought. And so I just wanted to close by saying that rarely in life do we get everything that we want. And we can make the best of everything that we do get. So let's take this amazing snowpack we have to refill our streams, reservoirs, groundwater, and get as much water as we can to Great Salt Lake. And with this little bit of pressure off, let's implement all of the things that we have to do and all of these water conservation efforts that are ongoing. And then finally, and maybe the most important, that we all take responsibility for our own individual actions and contributions to this effort of using less water, to coordinate and collaborate with stakeholders, agencies, NGOs, advocates, water suppliers, water users, and the list goes on. And our academic friends, don't want to forget you guys, but because we are all in this together, and at the end of the day, we can all use less water. Thanks.
Okay, I'm excited to see everyone here. I also want to hire whoever did Speaker Wilson's presentations because they are fantastic. My name is Emily Lewis. I'm an attorney with the law firm of ClydeSnow and Sessions with the esteemed Steve Clyde over there. Here today, we're going to talk a little bit about our statewide water marketing development strategy. So this is an ongoing effort to understand and give water users tools about water marketing, and in particular to pilot the concepts of the Utah Water Banking Act, which was passed in 2020. There is a lot of information in here. I'm going to probably skip some slides. Some of you may have seen this last week, and some of you may see it on Monday. That we do a really good job spacing out our water conferences here in Utah. So First off, kind of purpose. Like, what are we doing? Why does it matter? How is it going? What are we learning? And kind of what's next? So first off, what are we doing? We are, and I say we, I'm talking about a project management team that includes ClydeSnow, Westwater Research out of Colorado, HDR Engineering, and then our division partners of Water Rights and Water Resources. So we are in a 3 to 4 year effort to review and assess opportunities for water marketing in Utah by piloting the Utah Water Banking Project, or the Utah Water Banking Act. At the end of this effort, which actually is going to be this summer, we're going to have a statewide water marketing strategies report that summarizes our findings, but more importantly, provides useful tools to those interested in water marketing based on our experiences in our work with stakeholders. So this effort had a very long process to get here. Between 2017 and 2020, we had a stakeholder group of over 80 participants to kind of study what kind of water marketing activities existed in the state of Utah and what kind of water marketing opportunities existed across the West. We came up with a working thesis. Our working thesis focused on 3 key principles: voluntary, temporary, and local. So we're really talking about water leasing. So kind of our working thesis at the time was to better support Utah's growing water demands. Water banking could facilitate local, voluntary, and temporary transfers of water that generate income for water right owners and increase access to water. So that's kind of been our guiding principle for both in designing the Utah Water Banking Act, but also in exploring broader water marketing principles, which are bigger than just the act itself. So what we're doing here is the statewide water marketing strategies development strategy. So we're basically assessing water marketing opportunities in Utah. It's 3 to 4 years, really realistically 3, but we did add a 4th year, which I'll talk about in a minute, to try and get one more 4th-ish pilot project into this effort. We had $800,000 in funding, $400,000 from the state of Utah, and $400,000 from BOR Water Smart Water Marketing Program. We chose 3 pilot areas who kind of raised their hands saying, hey, we want to try water marketing here. We're willing to be guinea pigs and try the Water Banking Act. Come and work with us. At the end of this, we're going to have the report, like I said. So basically, the report is more than just the Water Banking Act, though. It's best fit marketing tools. We're assessing barriers, requirements, opportunities, and kind of providing some guidance documents. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Also some recommendations, and then functional tools like applications, forms. We have an interactive kind of question and answer survey that people are going to go through. So basically, what are we really doing? What does all this mumbo jumbo about marketing mean? So what I've really come to learn is that this project really is kicking the tires on what it looks like to lease and move water in Utah. We've had some very good activity in the past, but it's been pretty localized. And what this project's doing is just trying to learn from those lessons and scale that up. And by doing that, we've done a bunch of different activities. We've figured out how to engage and talk to stakeholders about water marketing. We've identified local water market conditions. We have tested the Water Banking Act, which is very specific in kind of how water users are to organize a lease to have it approved as a water bank. We've been implementing different leasing options, a bank or rental pool. We've been assessing complicated change applications because really all of this is going to come down to being able to move wet water from point A to point B, which requires a lot of effort from the Division of Water Rights and is going to require a lot of emphasis on our change application process. And then, in that is kind of, utilizing advanced shepherding tools. And then lots of kind of oh, we didn't realize that, or oh, I would have done that differently had I had another opportunity to do so. So kind of really looking at a bunch of different ways to implement water marketing. So why does water marketing matter? Basically, having water marketing tools allows us to kind of build a more resilient future. Most importantly, water marketing is a multiplier effect. We've been here now for 2 days listening to all the amazing things, both on the science side, but also today on the policy side. Realistically, water marketing is going to play a component in a lot of those state activities and a lot of the state priorities. We have regional conservation goals that Candice just mentioned. We have agricultural optimization efforts, Great Salt Lake Water Trust, the Colorado River Compact compliance, watershed councils, in-stream flows. Water marketing is going to play probably a piece in each and every one of these different elements, because at the end of the day, if you're going to incentivize people to use less water, and those people are water right holders or water right users, they're probably going to want to put that water on a market and be able to use and allocate that water a little bit differently. The other thing that I think is really important, why this is a multiplier effect, is that talking about water marketing also identifies the technical questions we really need to answer. How is our shepherding prepared for this? Do we have the administrative processes we need to do this? What does it mean to actually, once you install all the ag optimization activities, once you put the LIPA sprinklers, the LISA sprinklers, or you line a canal, then what does it mean to do the next step to actually, move that conserved water somewhere or quantify it? So it's really, having this market question is really also identifying what else do we need to do in our other processes to actually kind of make this whole very hairy sweater work together. So how's it going? It's good. We've been making slow and steady progress, but I think things are going to pick up a lot in the next month. So we have been working with the Water Banking Act. We've completed our pilot project effort, and we've kind of worked on some structural and administrative aspects of bank development. So we started this project on July 1st, 2020. Great time to start a stakeholder outreach project. I learned a lot about Zoom. My favorite meeting of all time is we had one for our Price Water Bank, where we had 8 little screens, and there was one guy was on a combine, and one person had a baby, and then my puppy was in the background, and I'm like, I love this. I could work like this every day. So we are kind of now moving into 2023. So we have completed all of our pilot project activities. We are now moving into our reviewing the pilots, getting kind of a draft report ready, moving it out into the pilot areas to review and give us feedback. We are moving into individual interviews with various participants to try and get some feedback. And then we're ultimately probably going to have our final report here, probably early fall, but a draft report kind of by summer. So just real quickly, like I said, this is kind of a twofold project. We've got the Water Banking Act, but we've also got water marketing principles, which are broader than the Water Banking Act. But what the Act itself does is it addresses barriers and extends benefits that were requested by water users back in 2017 through 2020 in our development process. It basically allows interested water users to design a leasing process for water, and then it allows the individual users to design a lease that works for them. They get to determine size of the project, pricing, administration of the project, how distributions from leasing are going to be distributed. And then the reason we kind of did this is we modeled it a little bit on kind of how irrigation companies work in the state of Utah, in that they're private entities that kind of get to choose their own rules. And we heard very strongly that here in the state of Utah, we were not interested in having a top-down water banking project like Idaho. We wanted these to be local little banks where individuals kind of set the rules of the game. Once the individuals have kind of decided what they want to do, they apply to the Board of Water Resources, and they can have that leasing arrangement approved as a Utah water bank, and then they are extended various benefits under the statute. This is also an exploratory act. It does have a sunset date of 2030. So if for some reason we decide we don't want to continue with this, or we want to move our resources elsewhere, it does have a sunset at 2030. So kind of the benefits of the Water Banking Act, again, it's local control. The individual water users are kind of deciding what kind of arrangements they want to make amongst themselves. It's a relatively kind of a streamlined administrative process. Once a bank is approved and a water right is approved to be in the water bank, that's intended to be a long-term approval, that water right will not need additional approvals once it's approved to be in. Water rights that are put into the bank or approved to be used in the bank are exempt from forfeiture. That's a really big deal, especially in developing and growing areas where you have irrigation companies that are actually losing their place of use for their water. It gives them an opportunity to have their water rights protected and put them to other uses. Environmental flows. When we did this bill back in 2020, there was not really a strong or easy means to do in-stream flows. That's now been addressed in the 2022 HB 33 in-stream flow statute, so that we'll see about how much these banks get used for environmental flows. And then also condemnation protections. One of the things we heard, especially from our ag community, is if I participate in a marketing activity, does this put a target on the back for my water rights so that someone's going to come and take it for other uses? And so if you're in a water bank, those water rights are protected from condemnation procedures for a period of time. Again, that is not something that happens regularly, but it is a concern that we heard from the local communities. Okay, I love this slide. I put it in every single presentation, but pretty much how is it going? How is our project progress happening? I wanted to put a couple things on here. We're all guinea pigs. Nobody had ever done this before. So everybody who signed up, we dove in head first, trying to figure out what's the next best step. Again, that lady is me, but we should add 17 plates to that lady. Balancing so many plates. Discussions amongst our pilot groups, discussions amongst our state agency partners, discussions amongst stakeholders, and then it's kind of a 3-ring circus or a 5-ring circus, but a happy one. Okay, so we've got 3 pilot areas that participated in this project to test these principles. The first is the Cache Valley, where we had initial conversations with about 4 or 5 interested irrigation companies. And originally we thought we were going to probably create some kind of in statutory water bank, because there's 2 kinds of banks under the Act, that was basically going to allow these irrigation companies to more easily transfer water amongst themselves. It was a really interesting discussion, though, because when we actually started getting in and asking market questions, hey, who has water? Who wants the water? Do you have it at the same time? We found that everybody wanted water when there was no water. So that is not a market. So that was really helpful for us to kind of identify what are some of the questions that you need to start this conversation with. And we'll talk about how that comes out here in a minute. But what did come out of this, though, is we decided that 2 of our 5 participants felt like they could do an agreement just between the 2 of them. And so they're we have water, you need it, it works for us to do a lease. And so we ended up doing just a 2-party lease for late season water in Hiram Reservoir. So this is helpful for us because it made us realize the Water Banking Act isn't going to be a good fit everywhere, but that doesn't mean there aren't other water marketing opportunities that we should be exploring. This was also really interesting too because Hiram Reservoir is a federal facility. And there are a lot of federal facilities here in the state of Utah. And we were able to do a lease arrangement between these parties because they were already members of the South Cache Water Users Association. So they already had a contract for storage in the federal facility. So federal facilities are going to be something we need to address here in the state of Utah. But anyway, we had a contract signed. They may lease water this summer. We'll see, but it's ready to go. So I give us a green check on that one. Second one, we had our Price River pilot study area, which is the Carbon Canal Company Bank. So this was basically going to be an original concept of basically a fallowing program at this stage, and then leasing the consumptive portion of the fallowed lands for in-stream flows in the lower Price River. We had 5 parties participate. We've got the Carbon Canal Company, the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, Division of Wildlife Resources, and then our bank applicant was the Price River Watershed Conservation District, because under the statute, to be a contract water bank, you need a governmental entity to participate to make sure that we don't have any speculative activity. So this one we actually got through. This is a contract water bank that was approved by the Board of Water Resources. So this is the first Board of Water Resources bank approved here in the state of Utah. So they have a contract, it's been signed. They did not do leasing this year because of some of the timing, but they may do leasing next year. We also, this is the first change application for our water bank to go through, and we learned a ton about how to do that going into the future. Early communication with the state engineer is critical. Public outreach is critical. We actually ended up getting about 80 protests to the change application for this bank, of which 76 were a form letter. And the form letter didn't have any problems with the bank. they had problems with water marketing in general. And so that told us that we still needed to do more outreach in the community. But then it got approved and then nobody challenged it. So it's cool. Somehow they got okay with it at the end. Okay, our third pilot project is the Snyderville Basin pilot project area. And in this case, we kind of tried to create a statutory bank, which would be a legal entity organized for the purpose of facilitating leasing amongst various parties. So I have water, I want water, I don't want to go through the process of trying to find someone to lease my water. I would give it to the bank, and the bank itself would kind of help things out. So this one, I still give us a check mark on, because we did not come up with an actual leasing arrangement in Snyderville Basin, but we did explore kind of what it would create to be a statutory water bank. But what we really found here, though, is that we did not have enough information to actually get to a lease arrangement. We needed more flow data to figure out how much water we actually needed, how much water needed to be moved, and kind of just answer some basic questions. So I give us a success in this because what we did is we installed 6 telemetry sites along East Canyon Creek. And basically, we decided that now that that information is here, there's probably not interest to create a statutory water bank because it was too big of a lift between the parties. But realistically, there probably can be some kind of leasing opportunity between several of the individual participants now that we have this information. It was also just really interesting to us because under the Water Banking Act, there's kind of 2 different options. There's a contract water bank, which is just basically like a contract between a discrete set of parties. And then there's a statutory water bank, which is a legal entity organized for the purpose of facilitating leasing, kind of like a middleman or a spot market. And what we did is, in testing the statutory water bank, we came up with a bunch of ways to say, hey, what does this act really require the participants to do? Like, what is the requirements under the act? And so we had this big Excel sheet and we said, okay, here's all the things the act would require. Here's all the things that you would need to do, even if it isn't explicitly stated in the act. And here's all the things that would be nice to do. And then we color coded it. That's our Excel sheet. And we kind of explained what the task was. And then we created a interactive survey for the participants to say, here's all the tasks we've identified. And then we asked, do you have the capacity to do this? Do you have the interest in doing this? And do you have the expertise to do it? And what we found is that everybody kind of liked the idea of a bank, but nobody really wanted it to be their baby. No one was like, I want to do this too much. And I think that's really helpful because there's a lot of activity in the water space right now, and there's a lot of marketing activity and interest, but it takes a lot of time. And so you really do need to understand that there's a committed group of folks who want to move this forward. And this process was really helpful for doing that. So what are we learning? Lots. We're just learning lots. So what we're really doing and how we're trying to organize this project going forward and into our actual deliverable of the report is we are going to be organizing the conversation around kind of 5 key marketing milestones: people, markets, logistics, transactions, and approvals. And each one of those milestones, we're identifying the key questions that you as a water user or interested water user would need to ask to make sure that you're securing the right elements at the right stage of the discussion. So people, engage participants and ask the right questions. We've got the people who want to lease water between themselves, but realistically though, you also need to make sure that there are other folks around too. Like you attorneys, I hate to say it, you're gonna need some attorneys involved in this conversation pretty early. You're going to want to involve the state engineer, the regional state engineer in this conversation pretty early. And so making sure you've got the right people in the room asking the right questions right off the bat. Also clear and transparent communication. One of the things we're trying to do in our process is to kind of do like 5 meetings to a water bank. Here's an order of questions that you should ask the people who are interested, but that's going to be pretty key. Markets. The other thing that we need to ask is we need to assess local water supply and demand conditions. I think that our Cache Valley pilot project was actually really instructive in this front, in that not every place with water is gonna have a viable market. everything might be fine the way it is, or there might be such a dearth of water that there's really not going to be a viable market. And so one of the things we're trying to figure out is to identify the drivers of local market activity. We are trying to, figure out like, why is water changing between hands, for local participants to assess. And then asking kind of like the key questions, like when everyone wants it, is it there? What kinds of water supplies are there? Are you talking about water rights? Are you talking about shares in an irrigation company? What kind of water really is your water supply? And then how is that going to inform your ability to move forward with the transaction? Our third marketing milestone is logistics. So basically this is evaluating the physical and legal methods to transfer water. You could have people in an area, you could have people who are interested, you could have a potential market, but you could physically not have the ability to move the water from point A to point B. So you really need to make sure that we're having like both the discussion about the physicality of moving water and kind of distribution, the existence of infrastructure, are there wells, are there canals, are there, is there a way to get water where we want it? And then there's also a legal question there. Is this the water right that I can move where I want it? If I have a 2022 water right, that's not going to do much. That's not going to be that valuable of a water right, unless it's like this year in flooding. But if you have an 1860 water right, that's going to be a very valuable water right that's going to be able to move through the system and actually get from point A to point B. So really this is kind of like the logistics, the legal hurdles of transferring the water and the actual physical infrastructure of transferring the water. The fourth marketing milestone is transactions. Now that you have the people in place, you've got a market, that you can physically do it. The next stage is you actually have to take all that together and put it together in a transaction, which is going to be some kind of leasing arrangement. And so, we're trying to really kind of expedite the discussion for water users by providing, here are kind of like the key elements in a lease transaction: pricing, administration. Typically, there's a schedule of how the parties are going to work together. And so really trying to get to a place where, we can kind of plug and play a little bit with some template leases, some template arrangements that can more quickly get people to, actually executing a transaction. We found that this stage is hard. This is the attorney stage. This is, most irrigation companies today, unless you're very sophisticated, still operate out of a glove box. This is hard, and they don't have a lot of money, and getting someone on board to help them with this stage is a barrier. And so one of the other things we're doing in our report too is we have kind of a list of like different kinds of transactions and times of transactions and ways to organize leasing transactions. So hopefully that's going to be very helpful for people. So kind of like, here's some of our transactions that we've got. We've got types of water marketing, two-party agreements, auctions, reverse auctions, bulletin boards, rental pools, a contract water bank. We've got types of water transactions: sales, one-year leases, multi-year leases, purchase options, lease options, exchanges, and then kind of like types of water entitlements, so the sources. So, depending on kind of what source of water you're going to have is also going to inform kind of what your lease transaction looks like. And here's an example. This is our Cache Valley Bank contract, actually. But, here's kind of like some of the things that are going to come into our draft template and forms: the participants, the activity schedule, the price setting mechanism, the lease term, the water source, the availability, distribution, specific water bank items, governance, reporting, accounting, enforcement, and supporting documents. All those things should be in your transaction to make sure everyone's taken care of. And then our fifth and final water marketing milestone is approvals. Now that you've got everybody set, you've got all the participants together, you're still not quite ready to do it because you still are probably going to need some additional approvals from state agencies or governance structures. So, for example, you're going to need a change application with the state engineer. And so we've had some really good discussions with the state engineer about, involving them early in the process and what's going to help them feel comfortable approving a change application for a water bank. Even if you don't do a water bank, though, and you do a different kind of leasing structure, you're probably still going to need a change application with the state engineer, especially if it involves an in-stream flow. Also, if you want to be a water bank under the Water Banking Act, and that's the leasing transaction you choose, there are some approvals that you're going to need from the Board of Water Resources. So kind of walking people through, the process of applying to the Board of Water Resources to have that particular leasing arrangement apply to be a bank. So we've got kind of two of those two. We've got a contract water bank, which is basically just a contract. And then, like I said, a statutory water bank. We do not yet have a statutory water bank set up here in the state of Utah. We are hoping that potentially a fourth bank or a fourth pilot project in the south part of Utah County might become a statutory water bank. The timing of that for our report, we're not quite sure on. So we might release the majority of the report kind of in the early fall and then do a follow-up addendum if this particular project gets going for a statutory water bank. But approvals are important. Okay, so next steps, we're going to work with the Mount Nebo Water Authority. That might be a statutory water bank. We're going to continue our pilot project at review and outreach. We're going to publish some beta tools and a draft report here early this spring. I just looked this morning at our new website. It's going to go live on Monday. Pretty exciting. Sorry, not for you guys today, but on Monday it'll go live with kind of where we are now. Roadshow. We're kind of starting our roadshow of bringing out these tools and tips to everybody, and then we'll have a final state report here kind of early fall. So that's it. Fun stuff.
All right, thank you, Emily and Candice, so much. Yeah, good. So we had quite a few different questions in Slido. A lot of them relate to where water is going, both on the conservation side as well as banking, and not just where it's going, but where it could potentially go. So Candice, starting with you, you talked about a lot of different programs that are available to conserve water. Where's that conserved water going? And is it going to Salt Lake right now? If not, could it? Talking about that a little more.
Sure, that's a great question. I think generally it's going to stay in our reservoirs and our streams and our groundwater. And then definitely with the potential, especially with the snowpack, that's going to cause all of those to be more full and have more runoff. So it will eventually get to the lake, but generally it kind of stays in the system.
Is there any discussion at all happening with the state to actually target some of that conserved water and direct it to the Great Salt Lake?
Sure. So in the agricultural optimization program, there are some opportunities there, especially with the passage of SB 277, which is water conservation and agricultural augmentation. There are some possibilities there that it could. We are still unpacking that bill, and we're, the state engineer and the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food are working on that.
And kind of a little side one, I'll just slide in since we're still with Candice. Of those measures you talked about, which one saves the most water per dollar spent?
Well, I mean, really, secondary metering is, well, let me go back. So agricultural optimization does have the biggest bang for the buck. And then follow up, and if you're talking about municipal and industrial, secondary water metering kind of came out ahead there.
Cool. Okay, so shifting over to Emily and talking about banking, there were some questions asking about water that is banked. Could it, what you talked about really seemed like fulfilling someone else's need for water. It's a transaction. It's really driven by an economical model. But can that same system be used to save water for wildlife preservation, to go to the Great Salt Lake and other?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about the way that we approached the Water Banking Act when we designed it, and then now that we're kind of moving into like the broader, water marketing strategies that are bigger and beyond the act itself, is that it's really intended to design a leasing project that works for the interested parties. And so if the interested parties are those who want water in the system for in-stream flow leases, or an entity like the Great Salt Lake, then that's totally fine. And the system can work well for them. If it's a project that wants to, help existing agricultural activities like the Cache Valley Bank by providing late season water, it's flexible to accommodate those items as well. I do think that realistically, because water rights are private property rights, market mechanisms are going to be the quickest way to get water to some of these environmental flows and needs. There's other discussions out there, but I think realistically having a market's going to be the most effective, because it's something we can kind of do now and are working on now. I also think that the efforts of the Great Salt Lake Trust and the Great Salt Lake watershed enhancement under the Great Salt Lake Trust bill are going to be a pretty good way to coordinate lots of different market activities and interests to get water to the lake.
And I just want to remind our audience, we do have a panel later today talking about finding and moving water. So some of the questions that were posed can be great follow-up for that panel. Another one that actually was from prior panel that fits in with this one talks about Utahns owning Utah's water. We have provisions in our Constitution. And so they're wondering, why should private interests profit from banking water that they're not using? Shouldn't that be returned to the Utah public account, be utilized for the public?
Yeah, one of the fascinating parts about working in water is the innate nature of a water right, which is a usufructuary water right. So under Utah law, the public owns the water of the state, the wet water molecule, and then private individuals receive the right to use that water as a water right. In Stegner Center, we did a great 101 earlier in the year where we talk a lot about the nature of water rights. So in my mind, in my personal opinion, if we're going to ask individuals, they have an entitlement right now under their water rights. And if we're going to ask individuals to install efficiency measures, which are not cheap, which take time and which take effort, then there needs to be an incentive for them to do that activity. And so realistically, to completely change our operations, to take land out of production, then there needs to be a market mechanism on the backside to make those efforts worth it. And so that's why I kind of think realistically, if we get reductions in our depletions, and if we get smarter with our water and conserve more water, then the folks who are installing and taking the risk of those new that new infrastructure should also get the benefit of that infrastructure and improvements.
Okay, and then one last question for Candice. We heard Governor Cox this morning say, gloom and doom isn't going to facilitate change. And yet a lot of people are wondering there's a big need, a million acre feet that needs to go into Great Salt Lake. Are these little conservation efforts really going to get there? And what's your response to them? To avoid the doom and gloom.
I mean, yes, right? All of these efforts are adding up and will make a difference. It will take time. That's why I'm really grateful for all the snow we have in our mountains, because it really will. That's going to help us, but then it also is going to help us get additional time to implement all of these different things. And I think it really will help. And I think we're all in it together. So we'll continue improving it to make sure it works.
On that
can I answer that one too?
Yeah, no.
I love this term, and I just feel like I need to get it out there too. So the solutions with Utah water are silver buckshot. There are no silver bullets. It's lots and lots of little things. And so I think that we have to keep that in mind, is that it's everything all at once. What is the movie? Everywhere?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to both of our panelists for involved here. Okay, and I'm pleased to move us over to our next speaker. And just a reminder again, amazing lineup of speaker here. Their full bios are online, so we're just doing very brief introductions. Our next speaker is the Executive Director of the Department of Natural Resources with our state, Joel Ferry. Please help me welcome him up as he talks about balancing competing demands.
Perfect. Thank you. And it is an honor and a privilege to be with you here today. Really exciting times that we're living in. And 6 or 8 months ago, the governor called me up. A good friend of mine, Brian Steed, had decided to go back into the academic world and leave his position as Director of the Department of Natural Resources. The governor called me and asked me if I was interested in doing that. And I thought, Great Salt Lake's at record lows. It's going to go lower. State's in drought. We have energy crisis. We have issues with wildfires. I mean, literally the day after I took this job is when the fires in Stockton and down in Fillmore broke out. I thought, sure, why not? Why not? Life choices. Sometimes we have to wonder about that. But let me tell you, one thing that growing up, I grew up on a farm up in Corinne, West Corinne, Utah, which is up on the north side of the Great Salt Lake. And my dad always told me, and we have this, and I have it with my kids today, this motto that we can do hard things. And that's what I tell my kids every day. We can do hard things, guys. We're going to do hard things. And we can take on these big challenges in life. And that's really what we're doing with Great Salt Lake. We're taking on big challenges. The second thing my dad told me was, don't be late for lunch. So we won't be. Perspective here, people. So at the Department of Natural Resources, we really are tasked with managing our state's natural resources. We have 8 different divisions, 2 offices. It's a wide array of a department for the state. And with that comes this, how do we balance competing needs within our state? When we look at that list, we have from sovereign lands to energy development, oil, gas mining, outdoor rec, parks, the PLPCO, Public Lands Office, water resources, water rights, wildlife resources, the UGS. And it's a very diverse department. It's something that's been fascinating to be part of. And I kind of compare it to having 10 different children. People ask me which is my favorite division, and it's the same thing I tell my kids. It depends on the day, right? So every day it's a new favorite child. But it's really fascinating to be able to be managing the state's resources. And when I took this position in the Senate confirmation hearing, the Senate asked me, what are your priorities? And I told them, and I still commit to this today, and the governor mentioned this as well. My number one priority was the Great Salt Lake, saving Great Salt Lake. At the time when I took this position, salinity was skyrocketing. We were seeing potential collapse of that ecosystem. And so we had to take some pretty drastic measures. And with the support, a very forward-thinking governor, support from leadership in the legislature, we've been able to really make some huge strides. And having a staff at Sovereign Lands, they're here today, some of them, thank you for being here, water rights, water resources, and others, we really have moved the needle, I think. We are tasked with maintaining and improving the quality of life for all Utahns by managing and protecting the state's natural resources. And you can see that list there of what our mission statement is. Great Salt Lake is at the top of the list right now, and it still is. Lake is up 2 feet from its low back in November. Salinity is declining. Things are looking much better than they were 6 months ago. But it doesn't mean we can take our eye off the ball. And Great Salt Lake is a critical resource. The environment, the ecology, the economy. And it's not just for Utah, but it's for the entire United States, the western states, and the entire United States. One of my goals in taking over this and managing the department has been a renewed focus with our federal partners. I see some of them here today. And really working to how can we manage this resource in that broader scope so we're not just doing it alone as a state. And we have to recognize that a drying Great Salt Lake has significant and dire consequences. Increased dust. We've had some presentations on dust, the issues and impacts of that. We've had the ecology, reduced snow, reduced access for recreation, and negative economic consequences as well. So by protecting and in making the investment, when we say protecting, like we're talking about making the investment both financially, but also in a policy perspective. Making those investments in the lake, we're helping protect Utah's economy, environment, and wildlife future. We're truly impacting the future of our state. And I think I love Emily's comment. That's not a silver bullet, it is buckshot. I can't tell you how many, so going back, when I decided and when we first started, I sat down and we prioritized what are the top 4 or 5 things that we can do that are going to make a difference, and how do we accomplish those? What steps need to take place to accomplish that? And that's what we've done. So this record low lake levels have highlighted the need to protect and preserve the lake. Restoring the lake, I looked at it kind of at competing interests here. Are we looking at lake elevations or are we looking at salinity? How do we balance those two? The immediate need was salinity, the long-term need is lake elevation. And those two will come together over time as we make these investments. So that's that short-term and long-term investment and solution. We can't control the weather. We can pray, as the governor said. We can do certain weather modifications, slight difference, does make a difference. But this year we have been so blessed. We have this, and I have a slide here, I'll show it, but this atmospheric river is just incredible that one after another has really helped to take the edge off. But the need on the lake, the low lake levels, the salinity, and these types of things helped kind of focus and hone in the importance of Great Salt Lake to our policymakers. And that's across the board. That's policymakers at our local community level, city leaders, county leaders, and especially at the state level. And as the governor talked in his remarks, to see the change in the fundamental shift in people's perception, especially in the legislature, that took place. I joined the legislature, I started 4 years ago. And to see that shift over that period of time to what it is today, the focus, the importance, the investment that's are being made, the legislation that's being passed, it's incredible. Something that we thought would have taken years, if not decades, to accomplish. So with that, there's a lot of different things. But with that, there's also a lot of competition for that attention. And these, so record low levels turned all eyes to Great Salt Lake. But in life, attention spans are short. And especially in politics, people want to move to the next crisis and solve the next crisis. I'm personally worried about message fatigue. I think it's real, and I think that we have to be conscientious of that. This winter has been fantastic, but the increased snowpack has pulled some of the urgency, just the edge of it. It hasn't stopped, but it's making people say, are we okay? I get questions, are we okay? Are we going to be okay? Yes, we're going to be okay. We're not okay yet. We're almost okay. So we got to keep this focus. We got to keep investing, making changes in that long term that will make a long-term difference. In other words, we have got to keep our foot on the gas. So Great Salt Lake, one of the things it's competing for is money, financial appropriation from the legislature, from the state, from the federal government to accomplish the things that we need to do. Now, we've been able to accomplish this the last 2 years. I've seen some of the reports. You look back over the last 30 years, there was an investment here or there, some modification to the Sovereign Lands Management account, but just the significant investment that was necessary just wasn't happening until 2 years ago when the drought really took effect. The speaker let out with the help of the governor and others, and we really made big investment, $500 million 2 years ago, over $500 million this last year as well. And, we have to balance that. This was in the middle of COVID, so there was requests on funding for, health and human services, funding for roads. We're seeing rapid growth. We have all these demands on these precious resources. So I think in this room and for us, and part of our mandate and mission at DNR is to keep the awareness high so that we can continue to kind of show the need and prove how we're being good stewards of the state's resources, that money, and put it where it needs to go. So I want to talk briefly about some of these legislative highlights. They've been mentioned, so I'm just going to kind of give my perspective. Agriculture optimization is the single most important thing that we can do as far as a bang for our buck and broad-based investment that will help Great Salt Lake. Question was asked, can we get this water to the lake? So when I go out and I visit with farmers and ranchers, they're saying, well, because they have the same question. They ask it in a different way, though. They say, well, what's going to happen to my conserved water? I have a block of water that's my right. My property rights, this water right. And now I did a conservation. I just invested a big sum of money. And now I only need 75% of that because I did something that's making me 25% more efficient. What happens to that 25%? right? So we made huge steps, a big shift this last legislative session in water policy in the state of Utah with Senate Bill 277. Candice mentioned this, but what it did ultimately is it shifted the narrative so that when we do an ag optimization project, the ranchers, farmers required to go and meet with the state engineer's office, do a pre-consultation. And if the savings they feel like between the two, that these savings can be quantified, then they're required to do a change application to identify that saved water. Now, this doesn't just immediately say, okay, that saved water is going to go to the Great Salt Lake, but what it does is it frees it up so that we can then have a quantifiable unit that if that individual wants to do something like that, they can. That's where this marketplace comes in. When we create these marketplaces, when we have long-term, I think it's personally, I don't know that we can continue to invest every year after year after year $500 million into water conservation and water projects. Maybe we need to, but I don't know if we're going to get that fatigue. And so I want to have some private market solutions as well. And that's what this bill does, is it creates some real help. So to help facilitate that, the state put $200 million in. We also funded $20 million towards a loan program, low interest loan. So if a farmer says, hey, I have this project, it's a couple $1,000s an acre, they get 1,000 of that paid for by the state. The other 1,000 they have to come out of pocket with. A lot of farmers are saying, I don't have the cash on hand. Farmers aren't flush with cash, and so they need to go and borrow that money. And so this is a way we can help additional assistance to promote more projects throughout the state. $20 million went to that. It's the ARDL program. Another huge shift is how we're going to message to the people of Utah. We've been doing the Slow the Flow campaign. It has received some funding. It's been on a small budget. We've done a fantastic job. Water Resources has been managing that with partnership with the conservation districts. But we recognize there's a need to do more. So this is a public-private partnership where we have investment from the public and from the private. So the state of Utah is putting in $2 million one time to get it going, and then $1 million ongoing. And we've got commitment for nearly $1.5 million ongoing from the private sector as well. So you're talking about a major ag campaign. Think about when you're driving down the freeway, you see, it's a red air day or an orange, drive less, carpool tomorrow. When we have that for water and we say, it's going to be windy, don't run your sprinklers tonight. Or it's 105 degrees here in the valley, don't water in the middle of the day. Those kind of messages are going to make a difference. It also helps promote education in the classroom for our school kids. We have got to ultimately change our culture. We've got to change how we're utilizing and recognizing this water. A huge shift, as well as this Great Salt Lake Commissioner. House Bill 491 is a big shift in recognizing and elevating the importance of Great Salt Lake. This is going to be in statute coordination position with the Department of Natural Resources, which includes the Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, so our sovereign lands division, water resources, water rights, the department as a whole, reaching across to DEQ, to the Department of Ag, and bringing all of these different initiatives and interests that we have, bringing them together so that we have a consolidated and unified message going forward. It's going to make a huge difference. It's going to be a great help to the efforts of our department in doing this. And finally, I mentioned this before, but we did make a humongous investment in cloud seeding. We've been doing cloud seeding as a state for over 50 years, but it's been targeted to reservoirs. It's been run by our districts. It's a collaborative effort between the state and the districts, but targeting to fill up our reservoirs. So we don't do a lot of cloud seeding if there's not a reservoir in that watershed. So we don't do a lot of cloud seeding in certain areas of our state. This is going to make a huge difference. We have scientific data. We've got our coordinator here. Over there. Scientific data that shows that it does make a difference and an impact. 4 to 13% increase in snowpack. A year like this, that's a huge difference. Dry years, it's still a big difference every year. Those kind of things are going to make a difference. Again, buckshot, no silver bullet. Now, the Great Salt Lake is this, I'm talking about competing interests and managing competing demands. Great Salt Lake is competing for water. Where's this water going? Agriculture in the Great Salt Lake watershed is using a lion's share, 65%, but it's also going to our M&I. It's going to mineral extraction. It's going to just natural evaporation off of our reservoirs. You think about that, every reservoir, surface evaporation. And then also these managed wetlands around the Great Salt Lake. What we're trying to do is to manage these resources more efficiently. Instead of just dumping everything into one category, we're trying to say, okay, every single thing that we're doing has an impact. So, and that helps us drive policies that will help us manage this water resource. We've made historic and enormous investment in measurement and management of our water resources this year. So agriculture, I said farmers when I go around and I visit with farmers, they want to be part of the solution. They do. They recognize how important these environmental concerns are. But they also, we have to recognize that they have senior water rights. They're here first. When the pioneers came, irrigation was the first trade, and that's what people did. And so there's this balance that has to be struck. Agriculture wants to do their part. I'm so encouraged by the interest and the willingness of our agriculture producers to participate in conservation. And we're working across the aisle with the Department of Ag to implement these projects and programs. Growth, fastest growing state in the country, huge demand for M&I use. How do we balance that, right? Industry, off the lake, magnesium, sulfate of potash, other minerals. Lithium is a hot item right now. How do we manage that? All these competing interests. Brine shrimp without the water, and a healthy range of salinity, there is no, that brine shrimp really, they struggle, which then has an impact on wildlife. So all of these things are interconnected. And ultimately, our goal at the department is to balance these different and competing interests. The ecosystem on the lake, as I said, when I started there, we saw this, the collapse was occurring. We saw the salinity levels being so high, the evaporation occurring, we were at record lows. You saw vast areas just going dry of the lake, having significant consequence on that ecosystem. Additional competing interests, right? Greatest snow on earth, why is that? It's because of Great Salt Lake. We'd have almost the greatest snow if it weren't for the lake. But because of that lake, we have the greatest snow on earth. That lake effect is so valuable to that industry, and it's a huge industry. Recreational interests. So not just on the lake itself, the lake is a critical component of recreation, but you think about all the reservoirs upstream. Every one of those reservoirs, every one of those rivers and streams. Recreation is centered around water in Utah. And so we've got to balance that. Quality of life is what this really gets to. So the costs of a drying Great Salt Lake and these different interests, it is real. And we've seen it. We've seen this play out in other areas. I know we've had some presentations on other areas where lakes have gone dry. We understand the consequences of allowing that to occur. So, as the governor said, we're not going to let that happen. We are saving the Great Salt Lake. Ultimately, this requires balanced solutions. Some things that when I talked about when I first took this position, we listed off some things. One of the things that we did that is going to make and is making a huge difference is the proclamation. We closed the Great Salt Lake watershed to new appropriation. No more straws in the system. We're going to set a floor. That's what we've done. And we're working through the impacts of that. Not easy, and it's impactful, but we did it. We created the water trust, $40 million into that water trust. The causeway, there's the breach on the causeway, the berm. We're going to an adaptive management berm there so that we can raise it and lower it to help manage the salinity. That is a salinity program, not an elevation program, but it's going to help us long-term so that we avoid that ecosystem collapse. And the continued investment in those things that make the most difference. Secondary metering, and agriculture optimization. Those two things alone make a bigger difference and are bigger bang for our buck than anything else we can do. And we're doing a whole bunch of other things as well, a whole bunch of other investments. But the reason you see the hundreds of millions of dollars going into these programs is because that's what will make the difference. The announcement from the church. I can't overstate how important and how valuable this donation is. The location of it, the delivery directly to the lake, the policies that we have in place enabled this type of donation to occur. And for the church to be so forward-thinking, to be able to take an asset that they have, to take this valuable water right, these shares in a canal company, to donate them, to give them to the state of Utah, specifically for the benefit, the perpetual benefit of the Great Salt Lake, can't be overstated. So valuable and so important. And it took a lot of work. It took a lot of foresight. And thank you to the church for that. I think the citizens of Utah are in your debt for that. So thank you. And I think this sets the example, paves the way for future partnerships and additional transactions. And ultimately, we're working in collaboration. We're balancing this collaborative effort, working with other agencies, working with other departments, working across the aisle, both state and federal and local communities, water districts. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment. This truly is a watershed moment for the state of Utah and something that we all need to get behind, and we are, and we're making a difference. Mother Nature certainly doing her part this year, and we need to be utilizing that to its highest and best use, to its greatest potential. Finally, a couple of slides left, but this snow water equivalent, this is really exciting, but also a little bit scary at the same time. As the speaker mentioned, we did put $5 million into the budget for some flood mitigation and control. I don't know if it's going to be enough. We'll see, right? The forecast is going to be it still stays cold in the future, which means that every day that goes by, that snowpack grows and it stays up there. But we are currently in record-breaking territory today. This chart, I think, is you can see, it's a great visualization. Last year, we were hovering in this, well, it's not pink on my screen, but these lower levels. We are over double the snow water equivalent this year today than we were last year, more than double. That's going to make an enormous difference to Great Salt Lake. And it takes the edge off just a little bit. It's very, very timely. And, but finally, we cannot take our foot off the gas. We cannot lose focus. We have got, despite this epic winter, we have got to be continued investment in water conservation, water efficiency projects. We've got to be supportive of these efforts, and we've got to recognize this is an investment in the future of our state. So together, we can get there. These strategic investments today yield short-term and long-term benefits that help secure our future. So with that, thank you, and I'll be open for any questions.
Okay, I got it working. Thank you, Joel. Yeah, we have quite a few questions. I'll try and combine a few since I know we're all anxious to get into lunch.
It's lunchtime, people. Let's remember that.
Get hangry. All right, a couple are related to concrete action to get us where we need to be. A lot of things happening out there, but it seems like there's a lack of the big picture. Again, this 1 million acre feet mentioned again. What do you think are the concrete targets we need from each sector that will get us there? And a related one asking you to comment a little bit more on the 4 to 5 things you had identified when you first became director about what you thought needed to be done to save the Great Salt Lake.
Okay, so those 4 or 5 things go into that shortfall, right? When I came into this, I looked at this as ultimately it's a math equation. We ran models and we came up with some different scenarios and we said, okay, we're this short. The Great Salt Lake Strike Team, which was headed up by the Kempsey Gardner Institute and the Janet Quinney Lawson Institute for Land, Water, and Air, Brian There you go. There's your shout out. But those two entities, and we really dove into these numbers. And so it's a range. It's to stabilize the lake, we're talking about 450,000 acre feet. To grow back to that long-term number that we want to see is more like 1 million. So it's a math equation, right? So how do we get there? So if we can get there through, and that's a 20-year shortfall. Like over the last 20 years, that's how short we've been. And that's those 4 or 5 things. So let's not go lower. So one of the things, we close water rights, right? One of the things, we continue to push for additional ag optimization and funding in water metering and other programs like that, because that's where we're going to get the difference. We have a guiding document at DNR that has these broken down, and there's probably 30 different items. So turf buyback program in our cities. I didn't mention that. The legislature invested $3 million ongoing into that. Simple little things. Swapping out the toilets in people's homes. I've tried for a couple of years to get that through the legislature. I haven't been successful yet. That's why this is a process. It's not just we're not across the finish line. That alone's 15,000 acre feet, right? So there's, on that list, let's see, the proclamation on the water rights. There was the continued investment. There's the modification of the berm, those types of efforts. I'd have to look at my list, but you're kind of catching me. There's a bunch of things. Some of them are in my slides, but yeah.
Thank you. And one last one here before we let everyone go. Kind of a complicated question of asking why Indigenous people don't have more water shares if they were here first. Very much ties into water law and the establishment of reservations. And I encourage you to tune in to Monday's U.S. Supreme Court argument that relates to this, Navajo Nation and Arizona. But, if we're here in Great Salt Lake, we talked about the teams that have been put together. Our Colorado River Authority program of Utah does have a tribal voice. What's happening to ensure that the tribal interests are protected with Great Salt Lake?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the tribes play a critical role, an important part of the history of Great Salt Lake and today in managing this resource. And so my intent is to reach out and to have a collaborative effort with the tribes and to rely on some of the knowledge and information they can bring. Really, this is an all hands on deck type moment. And our tribal partners can play a critical role in that. And so I look forward to working with them to come up with solutions that incorporate their ideas and concepts, and work with them to come up with the best solutions.
Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Joel. Another round of applause for him.